Nuclear standoff. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred in October 1962, was one of the most intense confrontations of the Cold War, bringing the United States and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear conflict. This 13-day standoff was precipitated by the discovery of Soviet ballistic missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US coast, marking the closest the world has ever come to a full-scale nuclear war. The seeds of the Cuban Missile Crisis were sown in the aftermath of the Cuban Revolution, when Fidel Castro overthrew the Batista regime in 1959. Castro's government quickly aligned itself with the Soviet Union, leading to deteriorating relations with the United States. In April 1961, the US sponsored the ill-fated Bay of Pigs invasion, an unsuccessful attempt by Cuban exiles to overthrow Castro, further exacerbating tensions between the US and Cuba. In response to the US's aggressive stance and the placement of American Jupiter ballistic missiles in Turkey, the Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev decided to secretly place medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles in Cuba. This move was intended to counterbalance the US advantage in missile capability, and to protect Cuba from another American invasion attempt. The crisis began on October 14, 1962, when an American U-2 spy plane, piloted by Major Richard Hazer, captured photographic evidence of Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba. Upon confirmation of the presence of these missiles, President John F. Kennedy convened a group of advisors, known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, EXCOM, to discuss the US response. After intense deliberation, Kennedy decided on a naval blockade, termed a quarantine, to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment to Cuba. On October 22, Kennedy addressed the nation, revealing the existence of the missiles and announcing the quarantine. He demanded the removal of the missiles and warned that any missile launched from Cuba would be regarded as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response. The announcement of the blockade brought the world to a heightened state of alert. Soviet ships bound for Cuba, some carrying additional military supplies, were stopped short of the quarantine line. Meanwhile, negotiations between the US and the Soviet Union intensified. Khrushchev initially refused to remove the missiles, insisting they were defensive in nature and accusing the US of escalating tensions. On October 26, Khrushchev sent a private letter to Kennedy, proposing that the Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba if the US pledged not to invade the island. The following day, Khrushchev sent a second, more demanding letter, insisting that the US also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Tensions escalated further on October 27, known as Black Saturday, when a U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, and another U-2 accidentally strayed into Soviet airspace, nearly provoking a military response. Amidst the escalating crisis, back-channel communications between the US and the Soviet Union played a crucial role. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, acting as an intermediary, met secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. The US agreed to the terms of Khrushchev's first letter and offered a secret assurance to remove the Jupiter missiles from Turkey at a later date. On October 28, Khrushchev announced the dismantling of the missile sites in Cuba, and the return of the missiles to the Soviet Union. In return, Kennedy publicly pledged not to invade Cuba. The crisis was effectively over, though the dismantling of the missile sites and the verification process continued for several weeks. The Cuban Missile Crisis had significant and far-reaching consequences for international relations and the Cold War dynamic. Both superpowers realized the catastrophic potential of nuclear war and the importance of improved communication and diplomacy to prevent such crises in the future. In the wake of the crisis, a direct communication link, known as the Hotline, was established between Washington and Moscow to allow for immediate contact between the leaders of the two superpowers. Furthermore, the crisis spurred efforts towards arms control and nuclear disarmament. In 1963, the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed, prohibiting atmospheric, outer space, and underwater nuclear tests. The crisis also led to a shift in the US and Soviet strategic doctrines, with both sides adopting a more cautious approach to their military engagements and nuclear policies. Domestically, the crisis bolstered Kennedy's standing, showcasing his leadership in navigating one of the most perilous moments in history. Conversely, Khrushchev's perceived capitulation contributed to his ouster in 1964, as he faced criticism from hardliners within the Soviet Union. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a pivotal moment in 20th-century history, demonstrating the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship and the necessity of diplomacy in resolving international conflicts. It highlighted the importance of clear communication, mutual respect, and the willingness to compromise to ensure global security. The lessons learned from this crisis continue to inform contemporary international relations and underscore the ongoing need for vigilant and measured approaches to conflict resolution. The Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation. A Cold War conflict. The Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation, also known as Konfrontasi, was a violent conflict that took place between 1963 and 1966. This conflict arose from Indonesia's opposition to the creation of Malaysia, which included the territories of Malaya, North Borneo, or Sabak, as well as Sarawak, and Singapore. Under the leadership of President Sukarno, Indonesia sought to destabilize and oppose the new federation, leading to a series of military engagements and diplomatic skirmishes that marked a significant period in Southeast Asian history. The roots of the confrontation lay in the decolonization process and the geopolitical shifts in Southeast Asia during the Cold War. Following the Second World War, the British Empire's influence in the region waned, leading to the independence of Malaya in 1957. The British proposed the formation of a larger federation, Malaysia, which was to include Malaya, Singapore, Sabak, and Sarawak. This proposal was met with resistance from Indonesia, which viewed the creation of Malaysia as a neo-colonial plot by the British to maintain their influence in the region. Indonesia's President Sukarno, a fervent nationalist, was determined to prevent what he saw as a threat to Indonesian sovereignty and regional stability. Sukarno's policies were also influenced by domestic factors, including his need to maintain political support from the military and the Communist Party of Indonesia, the PKI. The confrontation officially began on the 20th of January 1963, when Indonesian Foreign Minister Subandrio announced a policy of konfrontasi against Malaysia. This policy quickly escalated into military action. Indonesian forces, comprising regular troops and volunteers, launched cross-border raids and sabotage missions into Malaysian territory. These operations were primarily concentrated in the Malaysian states of Sabak and Sarawak on the island of Borneo. The conflict saw a series of skirmishes and guerrilla warfare tactics employed by Indonesian forces. The Malaysian military, supported by Commonwealth forces from Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, responded by conducting counter-insurgency operations. The British SAS, Special Air Service, played a crucial role in these operations, employing their expertise in jungle warfare. Several key incidents marked the Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation. One of the notable events was the Battle of Pluman Mapu in April 1965, where British and Gurkha troops successfully defended a border post against a larger Indonesian force. The confrontation also saw the deployment of British forces in Operation Claret, a series of secretive cross-border raids into Indonesian territory, aimed at disrupting Indonesian supply lines and bases. In addition to military engagements, the conflict involved significant political and diplomatic maneuvering. The Philippines, which also had territorial claims in North Borneo, initially supported Indonesia's opposition to Malaysia, but later withdrew its support and recognized Malaysia's sovereignty. The confrontation gradually de-escalated following a series of diplomatic efforts and changing political landscapes. The assassination of Indonesian Army General Nasution in a failed coup attempt by the PKI in September 1965, and the subsequent rise of General Suharto, shifted Indonesia's internal political dynamics. Sukarno's power waned, and Suharto, who took control of the government, adopted a more conciliatory approach towards Malaysia. A significant step towards peace was the Bangkok Agreement of the 11th of August 1966, in which Indonesia officially recognized Malaysia. This agreement effectively ended the confrontation, though it did not immediately resolve all the underlying tensions. The signing of the agreement marked the beginning of a new phase in Indonesia-Malaysia relations, characterized by efforts to build regional stability and cooperation. The Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation had lasting impacts on both countries and the wider region. For Indonesia, the conflict highlighted the need for political stability and military reform, leading to significant changes under Suharto's New Order regime. Malaysia emerged from the confrontation with a strengthened sense of national unity and an enhanced international profile as a sovereign federation. The conflict also underscored the complexities of decolonization and nation-building in Southeast Asia. It revealed the challenges of balancing national sovereignty, regional security, and international diplomacy in a post-colonial context. In conclusion, the Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation was a significant Cold War-era conflict that shaped the geopolitical landscape of Southeast Asia. It was a manifestation of the broader struggle for influence in the region, influenced by both local and global factors. The resolution of the conflict paved the way for a more cooperative and stable Southeast Asia. A struggle for sovereignty. The Guinea-Bissau War of Independence. The Guinea-Bissau War of Independence, fought from 1963 to 1974, was a significant conflict in the broader context of African decolonization. It marked the struggle of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, PAIGC, against Portuguese colonial rule. The origins of the Guinea-Bissau War of Independence lie in the broader context of Portuguese colonialism in Africa. Portugal, under the Estado Novo regime led by António de Oliveira Salazar, was determined to maintain its colonies despite the growing wave of decolonization sweeping across Africa in the mid-20th century. Guinea-Bissau, a small colony on the West African coast, had been under Portuguese control since the 15th century. The local population, however, was increasingly dissatisfied with colonial rule, which was marked by economic exploitation, social inequality, and political repression. The formation of the PAIGC in 1956 by Amílcar Cabral and his associates was a pivotal moment in the struggle for independence. The PAIGC sought not only to end Portuguese colonial rule but also to establish a socialist state that would address the economic and social needs of the people. The organization initially pursued non-violent means of protest but eventually turned to armed struggle as it became clear that Portugal would not grant independence peacefully. The war officially began on January 23, 1963, when PAIGC forces attacked Portuguese military positions in Tite. This marked the start of a protracted guerrilla war that would last for over a decade. The PAIGC, with its strong local support and knowledge of the terrain, adopted guerrilla tactics, striking Portuguese targets and then melting back into the countryside. The Portuguese, on the other hand, relied heavily on conventional military tactics and struggled to counter the guerrilla warfare effectively. One of the key strategies of the PAIGC was to gain control of rural areas and establish liberated zones where they could set up parallel administrative structures. By the late 1960s, the PAIGC had managed to control significant portions of the countryside, effectively creating a dual-power situation where the Portuguese controlled the urban centers and the PAIGC controlled much of the rural areas. The PAIGC received substantial international support, which was crucial to its success. The Soviet Union, China, and Cuba provided military training, equipment, and financial support. Cuba, in particular, played a significant role, with Cuban military advisors working closely with PAIGC forces. The PAIGC also garnered support from neighboring African countries, particularly Guinea, where they established rear bases and received logistical support. The war in Guinea-Bissau was part of the larger Portuguese colonial war, which also included conflicts in Angola and Mozambique. The simultaneous struggles in these colonies stretched Portuguese military resources thin, and increased international pressure on Portugal to decolonize. Several key events marked the course of the Guinea-Bissau War of Independence. One of the most significant was the assassination of Amílcar Cabral on January 20, 1973. Cabral was a charismatic leader and a brilliant strategist, and his death was a severe blow to the PAIGC. However, the organization managed to maintain its cohesion and continue the struggle under the leadership of Cabral's half-brother, Luis Cabral. Another major turning point was the proclamation of the independence of Guinea-Bissau by the PAIGC on September 24, 1973, in the village of Medina de Boé. This move was a bold statement of the PAIGC's de facto control over much of the territory and garnered significant international recognition, even though Portugal did not acknowledge it at the time. The decisive moment that led to the end of the war was the Carnation Revolution in Portugal on April 25, 1974. The revolution was a military coup that overthrew the Estado Novo regime and brought a new government to power, which was more inclined towards decolonization. The new government quickly moved to negotiate an end to the colonial wars and granted independence to its African colonies. On September 10, 1974, Portugal formally recognized the independence of Guinea-Bissau. This recognition marked the end of the war and the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Guinea-Bissau. The Guinea-Bissau War of Independence had profound implications for the country and the broader region. The war caused significant destruction and loss of life, but it also laid the foundation for the emergence of an independent Guinea-Bissau. The PAIGC, as the leading force in the independence struggle, became the dominant political party in the new state, and Luis Cabral became the first president. The war also had a significant impact on the broader decolonization movement in Africa. The success of the PAIGC inspired other liberation movements and demonstrated that determined and well-organized armed struggle could effectively challenge colonial powers. The support from international allies, particularly socialist countries, also underscored the global dimensions of the decolonization movement. The Guinea-Bissau War of Independence was a pivotal conflict in the history of decolonization in Africa. It highlighted the determination of the local population to achieve self-determination, and the importance of international solidarity in supporting liberation movements. Despite the challenges and hardships, the successful struggle for independence in Guinea-Bissau stands as a testament to the resilience and courage of its people. Unrest in Baghdad. The Ramadan Revolution. The Ramadan Revolution of 1963, also known as the 8th of February Revolution, was a significant event in Iraqi history, marking the overthrow of the Prime Minister Abd al-Karim Qasim, and the establishment of a new government led by the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party. After coming to power in 1958 through a coup that ended the Hashemite monarchy, Qasim implemented a series of reforms aimed at modernizing Iraq. However, his rule soon faced criticism due to his authoritarian tendencies, the marginalization of various political groups, and his inconsistent foreign policy. The Ba'ath Party, which promoted Arab nationalism and socialism, saw an opportunity to capitalize on the widespread discontent and position itself as a viable alternative to Qasim's rule. The Ba'ath Party, established in Iraq in the 1940s, gained support from various segments of society, including the military, intellectuals, and students. Its ideology resonated with many Iraqis who were disillusioned with Qasim's regime. Moreover, the regional political climate, marked by the Cold War and the influence of Nasserism, further fueled the Ba'athists' ambitions. The party's leaders, including Michel Aflaq and Salah al-Din al-Bitar, were instrumental in orchestrating the coup. The revolution unfolded on the 8th of February 1963, during the holy month of Ramadan, hence its name. The Ba'athist-led coup was meticulously planned and executed with the support of key military officers and units loyal to the party. The operation began with the seizure of strategic locations in Baghdad, including the radio station, the Ministry of Defense, and key bridges. This swift action caught Qasim and his loyalists off guard, leading to their rapid defeat. One of the critical moments of the coup was the capture and execution of Qasim. After intense fighting, Qasim was cornered in the Ministry of Defense building. Despite offers to negotiate, he refused to surrender and was ultimately captured and executed by firing squad. His death marked the end of his regime and the beginning of Ba'athist rule in Iraq. Following the coup, the Ba'ath Party quickly consolidated its power and established a new government. Abdul Salam Arif, a key figure in the revolution, was appointed as the president, while Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr became the prime minister. The new government embarked on a series of policies aimed at transforming Iraq into a socialist state, and promoting Arab unity. One of the first steps taken by the Ba'athists was to purge the government and military of Qasim's supporters. This purge extended to various sectors of society, including the media, academia, and civil service. The new regime sought to eliminate any potential threats to its authority and ensure loyalty to the Ba'athist ideology. Economically, the Ba'athists implemented policies aimed at redistributing wealth and promoting social justice. Land reforms were introduced to break up large estates and distribute land to poor peasants. The government also nationalized key industries, including oil, to reduce foreign influence and increase state control over the economy. These measures aimed to address the socio-economic inequalities that had plagued Iraq for decades. Despite their initial popularity, the Ba'athists soon faced opposition from various quarters. The party's authoritarian approach and repressive measures alienated many Iraqis, including former allies. The government's crackdown on dissent led to widespread arrests, torture, and executions. Political opponents, including communists, Kurds, and Nasserists, were targeted in a brutal campaign to silence any form of opposition. The repression extended to the Kurdish population in northern Iraq, who had long sought greater autonomy and recognition of their rights. The Ba'athist regime's refusal to address Kurdish demands led to a renewed insurgency, resulting in a prolonged and bloody conflict that further destabilized the country. The Ramadan Revolution had significant implications for Iraq's foreign relations. The new government aligned itself more closely with other Arab nationalist regimes, particularly Egypt under President Jamal Abdel Nasser. This alignment aimed to strengthen Arab unity and counter the influence of Western powers in the region. However, Iraq's relations with neighboring Iran and Turkey remained tense due to territorial disputes and concerns over Kurdish separatism. The revolution also attracted the attention of the superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, who were keen to extend their influence in the Middle East during the Cold War. The Ba'athist regime initially sought to maintain a neutral stance, but internal and external pressures eventually pushed Iraq closer to the Soviet bloc. This alignment provided the Ba'athists with military and economic support, but it also made Iraq a target for Western criticism and intervention. The Ramadan Revolution of 1963 was a watershed moment in Iraqi history, marking the rise of the Ba'ath Party and the beginning of a new era of political and social transformation. While the revolution initially promised to bring about positive change and address long-standing grievances, it soon devolved into a repressive and authoritarian regime. The Ba'athists' failure to build a broad-based and inclusive government led to widespread discontent and further instability. The legacy of the Ramadan Revolution is a complex one, reflecting both the aspirations and challenges of a nation striving for modernization and unity in a turbulent regional and global context. The Dhofar War. A strategic and ideological conflict. The Dhofar War, fought between 1962 and 1976 in the southern Omani region of Dhofar, stands as a significant yet often overlooked conflict in the history of the Arabian Peninsula. This insurgency, driven by the Dhofar Liberation Front, the DLF, and later the Popular Front for the Liberation of the Occupied Arabian Gulf, the PFLOAG, sought to overthrow the Sultanate of Oman, led by Sultan Sayyid bin Taimur, and later his son, Sultan Qaboos bin Sayyid. The war was not only a regional power struggle but also an arena for Cold War geopolitics, drawing in support and intervention from major global powers. In Oman during the early 1960s, Sultan Sayyid bin Taimur's regime was characterized by its conservative and isolationist policies, which resulted in widespread poverty, lack of education, and limited infrastructure. The Dhofar region, in particular, was neglected and marginalized, fostering resentment among its inhabitants. The DLF emerged in 1962, initially advocating for better living conditions and autonomy for Dhofar. However, the movement soon adopted a Marxist-Leninist ideology, aligning itself with broader anti-colonial and revolutionary movements in the Middle East and Africa. This ideological shift attracted support from communist states, including the Soviet Union and China, and regional allies such as South Yemen. The early years of the insurgency saw the DLF and PFLOAG gaining ground, capitalizing on the Sultanate's military and administrative weaknesses. The rebels employed guerrilla tactics, launching attacks from their bases in the rugged Dhofar Mountains and across the border in South Yemen. The terrain provided a strategic advantage, allowing the insurgents to evade the Sultanate's poorly equipped and trained forces. The situation began to change in 1970 when Sultan Sayyid bin Taimur was deposed in a palace coup by his son, Qaboos bin Sayyid, who initiated a series of reforms aimed at modernizing Oman and addressing the grievances of the Dhofari people. Sultan Qaboos' ascent to power marked a turning point in the war, as he secured substantial military and financial support from the United Kingdom, Iran, and Jordan. British military advisors played a crucial role in restructuring and training the Sultanate's armed forces, introducing modern counterinsurgency tactics. The Iranian Shah sent thousands of troops to assist in the campaign, reflecting the strategic importance of Oman in ensuring the security of the Strait of Hormuz and the flow of oil from the Persian Gulf. This international intervention significantly bolstered the Sultanate's position, allowing it to regain control over much of Dhofar. The Dhofar War was not merely a local conflict but a battleground for competing ideologies and strategic interests during the Cold War. The insurgents' Marxist-Leninist orientation and their support from communist states placed the war within the broader context of the global struggle between the Western Bloc and the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc. The Sultanate's alignment with Western and regional powers underscored the strategic importance of Oman in maintaining stability in the Arabian Peninsula and protecting vital oil routes. The conflict also highlighted the interconnectedness of regional politics. South Yemen's support for the Dhofari insurgents was driven by its own revolutionary government, and its desire to spread Marxist ideology in the Arabian Peninsula. Conversely, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states viewed the insurgency as a threat to their monarchies and supported Sultan Qaboos to prevent the spread of revolutionary fervor. By the mid-1970s, the tide had firmly turned against the insurgents. The combination of military pressure from the Sultanate's restructured armed forces, bolstered by British and Iranian support, and Sultan Qaboos' socio-economic reforms gradually eroded the insurgents' base of support. The construction of roads, schools, and hospitals in Dhofar, coupled with efforts to integrate the Dhofari people into the national framework, addressed many of the grievances that had fueled the insurgency. The Dhofar War officially ended in 1976, marking a significant victory for Sultan Qaboos and his allies. The defeat of the insurgency reinforced the stability of the Sultanate of Oman and underscored the effectiveness of coordinated international support in counter-insurgency efforts. The war also served as a cautionary tale for other states in the region, illustrating the potential for internal conflicts to draw in external powers and influence regional dynamics. The Dhofar War was a multifaceted conflict that combined local grievances with broader ideological and strategic struggles. It underscored the importance of addressing socio-economic disparities and integrating marginalized regions to prevent insurgencies. The war also highlighted the significance of international alliances and support in shaping the outcomes of regional conflicts. Today, the Dhofar War remains a key chapter in Oman's history, reflecting the complex interplay of local, regional, and global forces in shaping the Middle East during the Cold War era. The Moscow-Washington Hotline. A Cold War communication lifeline. The Cold War era, marked by intense geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, witnessed numerous crises that brought the world to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. Among the notable outcomes of this period was the establishment of the Moscow-Washington Hotline, a direct communication link aimed at reducing the risk of misunderstandings that could lead to nuclear war. The impetus for creating a direct communication link between the superpowers stemmed from the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. This 13-day confrontation highlighted the perilous nature of delayed communications during a nuclear standoff. Messages relayed through intermediaries and diplomatic channels took hours to deliver, exacerbating the risk of miscalculations. Recognizing this danger, both nations sought a more immediate method of communication to ensure swift dialogue during emergencies. The idea for a hotline was not entirely new. It had been proposed earlier by academics and policymakers concerned about the escalation risks inherent in the existing communication systems. However, the urgency of the Cuban Missile Crisis galvanized action, leading to the hotline's establishment in 1963. The Moscow-Washington Hotline, often referred to as the Red Telephone, was inaugurated on June 20, 1963, with the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding regarding the establishment of a direct communications link between the United States and the Soviet Union. This agreement outlined the technical specifications and operational protocols for the hotline. Contrary to popular belief, the hotline did not consist of a red telephone, but was initially a teletype system. This choice was deliberate, as written communication reduced the risk of misunderstandings due to language barriers and the potential for misinterpretation inherent in voice communications. The hotline operated over a secure, dedicated line, initially using commercial telegraph circuits provided by Western Union and the Soviet Union's Ministry of Communications. The original setup included two main routes: a primary circuit via London, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and Helsinki, and a backup circuit through Washington, New York, London, Zurich, and Moscow. This redundancy ensured the system's reliability even if one route was compromised. Over time, the hotline underwent several technological upgrades to enhance its speed and reliability. In 1971, the teletype system was replaced with a more advanced facsimile, fax, machine system, allowing for faster transmission of longer messages. By 1986, the hotline had evolved to include satellite communications, further improving its efficiency and dependability. The introduction of secure computer links in the 2000s marked the latest significant upgrade, reflecting advancements in digital technology. These improvements ensured that the hotline remained a vital and functional tool for crisis communication between the United States and Russia, the successor state to the Soviet Union. The Moscow-Washington Hotline has played a crucial role in several critical moments of the Cold War and beyond. Its first significant use occurred during the Six-Day War in 1967 when both superpowers utilized the hotline to manage their responses and prevent the conflict from escalating into a broader war. Similarly, during the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War, the hotline facilitated direct communication that helped to de-escalate tensions. One of the most notable uses of the hotline was during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The United States and the Soviet Union used the hotline to exchange information and coordinate their diplomatic efforts, ultimately preventing the conflict from drawing the superpowers into direct confrontation. Beyond these specific incidents, the hotline has served as a constant reassurance of open lines of communication, a psychological deterrent against the use of nuclear weapons. Its existence underscored the mutual recognition by both superpowers of the catastrophic consequences of a nuclear war and the need for measures to prevent such an outcome. The success of the Moscow-Washington hotline inspired similar communication links between other nations. For instance, in 1966, a direct link was established between the leaders of the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union. Additionally, the concept of hotlines has been adopted in various forms for conflict prevention and crisis management globally. The hotline also symbolizes the broader principle of diplomacy and dialogue in international relations. Despite the ideological chasm and mutual distrust characterizing the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union recognized the importance of maintaining direct and reliable communication channels. This recognition laid the groundwork for subsequent arms control agreements and détente efforts that aimed to stabilize their relationship and reduce the risk of nuclear war. The Moscow-Washington hotline stands as a testament to the necessity of clear and direct communication in preventing misunderstandings and managing crises between superpowers. Its establishment was a pivotal response to the Cuban Missile Crisis, demonstrating a shared commitment by the United States and the Soviet Union to avoid nuclear catastrophe. Over the decades, the hotline has adapted to technological advancements, ensuring its continued relevance and reliability. As a symbol of pragmatic diplomacy, the hotline remains a critical tool in the arsenal of international peacekeeping and conflict resolution. In the next chapter, we will cover the 1963 South Vietnamese coup, as well as the Colombian conflict, and the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy.